My dad mocked me at the wedding, then spat his wine. When the groom saluted. The first time someone called me unfit to wear the uniform, I was 19 and barely 2 weeks into West Point. The second time it came from the man who raised me. But nothing prepared me for hearing it on my wedding day, spoken by my father, loud enough for the entire reception to hear. The room had been humming with low conversation, and the gentle clink of cutlery when his voice cut through sharp as a drill sergeant's bark. "Don't mind her. She's just army trash." My heels stopped on the polished floor. My uniform felt suddenly heavier metals pressing into my chest like accusations. The air didn't just still, it locked in place. Somewhere near the bar, a few guests chuckled. Not because they thought it was funny, but because they didn't know what else to do. 12 years of service, 4 deployments, the kind of commendations you don't get for showing up. And in his eyes, I was still the girl who didn't belong in boots. My father, Colonel Thomas Blackwell, had saluted strangers in uniform more often than he had ever acknowledged mine. To him, daughters weren't soldiers. They were spectators. I didn't move. I didn't give him the satisfaction of flinching. But I felt the old familiar heat crawl up the back of my neck, the same way it had when I was a teenager folding his shirts in silence, knowing my brothers got the handshake and I got the chore. That was when David, my husband, my second in command, stepped forward, calm, controlled. His voice cut through the room without a single wasted syllable. "Sir, that trash is my commanding officer." The clink of glasses stopped. Even the string quartet faltered, and for the first time in my life, the silence that followed didn't isolate me, it shielded me. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment my story would stop being about proving myself to him and start being about standing fully for me. People like to believe family rifts happen in explosions, screaming matches slammed doors, ultimatums. Mine was quieter. It happened over years in unasked questions and unspoken judgments. My father didn't have to say I wasn't enough. His silences did the work for him. Colonel Thomas Blackwell served 3 tours before I was born. He wore his bronze stars like extensions of his spine, rigid, gleaming, untouchable. At home, the rules were as precise as his parade formations. Shoes aligned at perfect angles. Meals at 0600 sharp. Voices low. Emotions, non-existent. My brothers got the nods, the handshakes, the good job, son. I got straighten your shoulders and don't mumble. My mother, soft-spoken, book-scented, was the only warmth in that house. When breast cancer took her, the air thickened into something cold and unyielding. Without her, there was no one to translate my father's clipped orders into something like love. I learned early to survive in the silence, folding laundry in perfect squares, memorizing military acronyms I had no business knowing, pressing my own shirts sharp enough to pass inspection. By 16, I had memorized West Point's campus map, tracing it like a secret I wasn't ready to share. When I finally told him I wanted to apply, he didn't yell. He just laughed short, humorless, and left his dinner unfinished. That was our rhythm. I'd speak, he'd dismiss. When my acceptance letter came, I placed it on the kitchen counter next to his coffee mug. No congratulations, no acknowledgement. 3 months later, he drove me not to the academy, but to the Greyhound station. No handshake, no hug, just an envelope with a $500 check and a typed note. "You'll need boots. Don't embarrass yourself." Then he left before the bus even pulled out. From that moment, I stopped trying to earn his approval. But I never stopped noticing his double standard attending my brother's short-lived stints in uniform, with pride shaking the hands of strangers in dress blues, yet never once seeing me in mine. At West Point, I learned quickly that effort, not bloodline, earned respect. I wasn't the fastest or the loudest, but I became the one who finished what she started. While others called home for comfort, I had no one to dial. My commissioning day was crowded with proud families. I pinned my own bars in silence. Every promotion came with the same pattern my unit celebrated. My father stayed silent. Once, when I made captain, I mailed him a photo. He returned it unopened. I stopped sending them. I didn't realize it then, but those years forged something far more unshakable than his approval. I learned to operate without a safety net, to lead without expecting applause, to stand without leaning on anyone, especially the man who refused to stand beside me. By the time I returned stateside as a senior operations officer, I'd already stopped looking over my shoulder for approval. My focus was on the work operations briefings, convoy risk assessments, keeping people alive in places where maps were more suggestion than fact. That's when David Monroe walked into my world. He wasn't the kind to fill a room with volume. His presence was quieter but sharp. The first time I noticed him was during a risk mitigation briefing. Most intel guys glazed over when logistics took the floor. He didn't. He asked questions that cut straight to the weak spots in my plan, not to undermine, but to strengthen it. When the meeting ended, he waited for everyone else to leave before tapping the edge of my map. Shift Echo Route 3, clicks west, better terrain, fewer eyes. He was right. Over the months that followed, we worked side by side in Syria, under a joint task force. It wasn't glamorous negotiating with local forces coordinating supply lines through unstable territory, but it was relentless. David never had to be there for half the situations he showed up to, but he came anyway. Once, during a tense handoff, tempers flared and fingers hovered over triggers. I stepped forward, voice steady, and de-escalated it. Later, he pulled me aside and said, "You don't flinch, do you?" I told him. "Not when it counts." We didn't start dating until after the deployment ended. No whirlwind romance, no theatrics, just coffee, quiet conversations, and the steady realization that he wasn't trying to fix me or soften me. He met me exactly where I stood. When he proposed, it was in the stillness of Arlington National Cemetery after a funeral for a fellow officer. He held out the ring and said, "I know you don't need anyone, but I'd like to serve beside you in whatever comes next." I said yes without hesitation. We planned a military wedding, no frills, no flower girls, just precision and purpose. At first, I didn't want to invite my father, but hope has a way of lingering, so I mailed the invitation. 3 weeks later, a reply card came back, one guest, no note. 2 nights before the ceremony, members of my old units arrived unannounced. Soldiers, Marines, and airmen I'd pulled from floodwaters years before. "You never left us behind," one said. Now it's our turn. On the morning of the wedding, I stood in my white service uniform, boots, polished medals earned. I thought of my mother, of the years of silence, and of the man waiting for me at the altar, not to save me but to stand with me. I didn't know it yet, but before the day ended, David would give me a gift my father never had, the kind of public respect that changes everything. The base chapel at Fort Myer was hushed when I arrived. No organ prelude, no chatter, just the steady shuffle of polished boots and the quiet murmur of uniforms in the pews. My escort team, the same service members who had shown up 2 nights earlier, formed a protective line at my side. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. Their presence spoke louder than any toast. At 12:45, I stood behind the double doors. My gloves were snug, my shoulders square. That's when my phone buzzed. An unknown number, no subject line, just 5 words. "Don't embarrass the family again." No signature. I didn't need one. I slid the phone into my coat pocket without breaking my stance. When the doors opened, the room rose to its feet, not for pageantry but out of respect. 200 soldiers, officers, and veterans formed a sea of steel gray and brass. David was at the altar, blue suit, sharp eyes locked on mine. For a moment, the weight of years, the rejection, the absence, the unspoken questions fell away. This wasn't about who didn't show up. It was about who did. The ceremony was as precise as any military formation vows, stripped of fluff promises, rooted in service and survival, to stand beside each other in chaos and in calm. We exchanged rings, signed the registry, and moved to the reception. We'd chosen a modest mess hall near the officers' quarters. The air was warm with low jazz clinking glasses and the scent of cornbread and whiskey. Laughter drifted in pockets. I was halfway through my second drink when I saw him, Colonel Thomas Blackwell, standing near the bar, in immaculate dress blues, surrounded by a small cluster of veterans from his era. He hadn't greeted me. He hadn't acknowledged the ceremony. He was scanning the room like he was inspecting a unit. And then as I passed within earshot, I heard it. "Don't mind her, she's just army trash." The words rolled off his tongue with casual contempt, like they'd been rehearsed. The men around him chuckled, not because they found it funny, but because they knew who said it. I froze. The glass in my hand felt suddenly too light. Years of discipline kept me from turning around, but David didn't share that restraint. 2 steps behind me, he pivoted toward my father. His voice was calm, even every syllable deliberate. "Sir, that trash is my commanding officer." The room went still. Conversations died mid-sentence. The string quartet faltered. My father blinked, then choked, literally spitting wine down the front of his uniform. David didn't move. His stance was steady, hands clasped behind his back, gaze unwavering. One by one, people began to stand. A Marine major, a Navy corpsman, a retired SEAL with a prosthetic leg. No speeches, no theatrics, just quiet solidarity. My father glanced around, clearly unprepared for the shift in the room. Then he turned and walked out, his polished shoes clicking against the tile until the door swung shut behind him. I didn't follow. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to. The door had barely closed behind my father when the room exhaled, not with relief, but with something quieter, heavier. No one rushed to fill the silence. They stayed standing. A few saluted. Others simply gave small nods. It wasn't a performance. It was presence. Chief Reyes, one of my oldest NCOs, stepped close enough that only I could hear him. He blinked. "That means you won." I didn't laugh. Winning had never been the goal. Breathing without the weight of proving myself, that was. The music resumed eventually. Conversations picked up in cautious ripples. People approached me differently now, not as a bride in white, but as a peer, a leader. I could feel it in their eyes, the kind of respect you don't buy, beg for, or inherit. You earn it one decision, one day, one deployment at a time. Later, I stepped out onto the balcony. The air was cool, carrying the faint tang of sea salt from somewhere beyond the base. David joined me, leaning against the railing, his silence as steady as his stance. After a moment, he asked, "You okay? I didn't think he still had that kind of venom in him," I admitted. David shook his head. "It wasn't about you. It was about the part of you he never understood, and now he can't ignore it." The truth of it settled deep. My father didn't leave because I'd embarrassed him. He left because the room no longer agreed with him. The culture he had carried like gospel, the one where women in uniform were novelties or footnotes, had shifted. For the first time, he was the one out of step. That night, back in our quarters, I unbuttoned my coat and set it neatly on the chair. My medals caught the moonlight glinting against the quiet. David sat on the edge of the bed, unlacing his shoes. He called me army trash. I said more observation than confession. David's eyes met mine. "Do you believe that I looked at the uniform, 4 rows of commendations insignia of a senior commander, years of service stitched into every seam? I thought of the convoys I'd led, the soldiers I'd brought home, the condolence letters I'd written when I couldn't. No," I whispered. "I don't." David nodded once firm. "Good. Then that's the last time it matters." And just like that, I felt something unclench inside me, not the need to forgive him, but the permission to stop carrying him. The morning after the wedding, my inbox held a single new message. No subject line, no greeting, just 5 words. I stood outside. I listened. No signature, but I didn't need one. I stared at the screen, half expecting more, to follow a line of contrition, a scrap of pride, but nothing came. I closed the laptop without replying. For the first time, his silence wasn't a wound. It was simply absence. Weeks passed. I returned to duty briefings, audits, deployment readiness drills. The work was the same, but I was lighter. Not because my father had changed, but because I no longer measured myself against the space he refused to fill. Then, months later, a small, unmarked package arrived. Inside was a black and white photograph taken from across the chapel lawn on the day of the wedding. In the far corner, half hidden behind a pillar, stood my father, back straight, head slightly bowed. No note, no explanation. I kept it not as proof he'd come, but as a reminder you don't need someone to stand beside you to know you're standing on your own. 3 months later, I was invited to speak at a leadership symposium at Fort Belvoir. The topic, Modern Command in Transition Women in Leadership Roles. At first, I almost said no. I didn't want to be the token example. But then I thought of the cadets, the junior officers, the women still being told to smile more or to lighten up in a briefing. I thought of the ones folding their strength into silence because they thought they were alone. So I wore my full dress uniform not as armor, but as earned reflection. I spoke of real command convoys negotiations, water rations, the moments when leadership meant being the calmest voice in the chaos. I quoted my teams, not my father. When I finished, the room rose in a standing ovation, and in the back near the exit stood my father. No uniform, no decorations, just him. He waited until the crowd thinned, then approached, extended his hand, and said, "Ma'am, you did good." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a rewrite. But it was recognition, and for once I didn't need anything more. My father and I will never rewrite the years we lost. There will always be the empty seats, the unopened letters, the moments when his silence spoke louder than any insult. But here's what I know now: respect doesn't have to come from the person you wanted it from most. And when it finally arrives, it should never be the reason you stand taller. You should already be standing. That day at the symposium, shaking his hand wasn't about forgiveness. It was about choosing not to carry the weight anymore. His recognition was a late arrival, but my worth had been present all along, built in convoys safely completed and soldiers brought home in the trust of every team I'd led. If you've been dismissed, underestimated, or reduced to a label someone else thought fit, you hear me when I say this: they were never describing you. They were describing what they couldn't handle about you. Your ambition, your resilience, your refusal to fit into their narrow frame. You don't need a salute to prove you've earned one. And when it finally comes, whether from a stranger, a teammate, or the person you thought would never give it, you'll realize it changes nothing about who you already are. So to every person still fighting to be seen, stop fighting for their gaze. Stand in your own. Live so fully, lead so fiercely that those who doubted you have no choice but to take notice. And when they finally do, don't shrink. Stand taller, not for them, but for the ones watching, the ones still learning. They're not alone. If this story stayed with you, share it. Someone out there needs to hear that their value is not up for debate. We salute you, and if no one else does, I will.